This time on Poll Hub, we have brand new data from our NPR PBS NewsHour poll of Americans. We asked about President Biden, the COVID relief bill, the pandemic itself, and a whole bunch of other things. Spoiler alert, there's still some big partisan divides in here, but there are also some very surprising things voters on both sides seem to agree on. I'll leave it there. It's a tease. Then this week marks the one-year anniversary of the World Health Organization's declaration of a worldwide pandemic. Do you remember when you realized everything had changed? That's a story the host of NPR's Weekend Edition Sunday has been working on, and we have her, Lulu Garcia Navarro, here to talk about it. It is a momentous week in so many ways, a lot to talk about, so let's get to it. And hi, everybody. Welcome to Poll Hub. I'm Jay DeDapper, Director of Innovation here at the Marist Poll.
And I'm Barbara Carvalho, Director of the Marist Poll.
And I'm Miringoff, Director of the Marist College Institute for Public Opinion.
We are recording this podcast on Thursday, March 11th. Two things happening simultaneously. One of them is it is the one-year anniversary of the World Health Organization, as we mentioned, declaring a worldwide pandemic. But also Joe Biden is signing the COVID relief bill almost at the moment that we're recording, very close to it. And we have a poll that comes out today as well. So a momentous day in so many ways. I want to start with one number because it strikes me as kind of central to a lot of this. And I call it the Goldilocks question. We can get to a lot of these other ones, but I call it the Goldilocks. I think we all call it the Goldilocks question, which is the too hot, too cold, or just right. In this case, though, we're asking about the COVID relief bill. And as we mentioned, it is being signed at this moment. The question is, do Americans think that it goes too far, not far enough, or is it just right? And I think it's striking to me anyway that despite, look at the partisanship and all that, but in general, Americans feel 37% of Americans say it's about right, 34% say it goes too far, and 21% say it does not go far enough. If you have that 21 not going far enough and is about right, 37%, it's 58%, nearly 6 in 10 Americans are on board with this. I can't think of too many big program changes, big bills that have passed in the last decade that have had that level of support.
Yeah, I think that's really very valid. I do see also that it's tied to both the coronavirus and the economic needs that people have, and it's tied to Joe Biden, and it's his first big piece of legislation, and 62% in this poll approve of how he's handling the pandemic. So people there is a honeymoon. It's not in the votes within Congress, but it seems to be more with the American people who are giving him a point of departure.
Well, I think one thing that was interesting, particularly with that question, if you think about the vote for the package in the Senate. It was Democrats on one side, Republicans completely on the other side. And that's not to say there isn't a partisan divide among Americans as well. 69% of Republicans say the package goes too far, and 62% of Democrats say that it is about right. But what I did find interesting was that 14% of Republicans said that it didn't go far enough.
Mm-hmm.
And another
right? What's that about?
and another 11% said it was about right. So you have a quarter of Republicans, clearly behind this bill, or actually wanting to see a bit more. Now, those numbers are off the charts for Democrats. As I mentioned, the 62 who said it was about right, and another 26% who said it didn't go far enough. But you point out, Jay, that the likelihood is those that said it didn't go far enough were still behind, what's there. So that's
Sure.
That's not only a majority among Americans, and but a strong support of Americans behind the president's between the president's relief package.
One of the things I think in here that also jumps out, and analysts have been watching and waiting for almost 4 years. When will Donald Trump magic go away, and his hold on the Republican Party especially? And when you talk about Donald Trump, he's does well with Republicans, but you guys just mentioned this one statistic: the 25% of Republicans who are going, okay, I think this is kind of like where we got to go, or maybe even go a little further. We also saw in this poll which I mentioned is, the approval of how President Biden is handling the coronavirus. 30% of Republicans are supportive of how he's doing it. And then we asked about how Americans are responding to Democrats in Congress and Republicans in Congress. And this was really a jump outer.
This is the tease, incidentally. This is my tease from the open. This is here. So
here it comes.
Pay attention, people. Here it comes.
And if I had a drum, I definitely would give a little snare action there. But so what we have here is Democrats 80%, supporting Democrats in Congress. It's the highest overall score for Democrats since we've been polling this question for a long time. 41% approving of the Democrats in Congress. But here's your tease, Jay. The Republicans, only 28% of the country to 64 think that the Republicans in Congress are doing a good job. And among Republicans, 38% of Republicans have a thumbs down on how Republicans in Congress are handling, their job in Congress. So people are watching. I don't know if this is tied to January 6th or it's tied to Donald Trump sort of fading from the picture, or that the face of the Republican Party is now, all the Trump wannabes, the Ted Cruzes and the Rubios and the Hawleys and the Cottons of the world. But to get that many Republicans to say that they disapprove of how the Republican Congress is doing its job is 38%. I just think is, a real wow moment.
I mean, we've talked for 4 years about this giant partisan divide. And I think you're right. This is one of the first kind of significant signs of the partisan divide being a little less fierce. And part of it also reflects, I think, the turmoil of the Republican Party. The party has multiple identities right now, and that's always a challenge. I do want to mention one other thing in the poll that I thought was really interesting, and that's about the priorities. I don't think there's any doubt that a majority of Americans think that the coronavirus pandemic has been a consequential, significant, big event. There are some people who have downplayed it, but I think we've seen this even across parties. They understand the importance of this. What happens next and where we go from here, there is a divide here as well. We asked what the priorities were: vaccine distribution, reopen schools, financial relief to small businesses, direct payments to individuals, extend unemployment benefits, and then people were unsure and they didn't think it was a priority, and those were very small numbers. Democrats, 60% of Democrats said vaccine distribution was job number one. 29% of Republicans said that their top priority, Republicans' top priority, is to reopen schools. In this, when we look at all the subgroups, all the breakdowns of gender and income and region and everything, this is the only place where the top priority switches from vaccine distribution to reopen schools. So while we talk about that partisan divide kind of showing signs of cracking one way and another way, there is this partisan divide about the priorities. And I don't know that that's political as much as it's just interesting to me that independents and Democrats, by a pretty wide margin, think vaccine distribution is job number one, but Republicans think reopening schools is. Why? Not that it's right or wrong, but I don't understand, I guess, the partisan divide on that. Why would people in one party think that reopening schools is more important than vaccine distribution, or vice versa?
Well, I think one of the issues, we have two really huge elephants in the room: the coronavirus and the economy. And they are actually linked together. We can't really have, one without the other. We're not going to solve either one of them alone. So, well, we do know from our polling that Democrats are certainly much more focused on the coronavirus vaccine distribution. So are independents, generally those who lean Democratic. And, that's one perspective and one approach. We then also know that Republicans are very anxious to get the economy going as a priority. So I think the idea of seeing, vaccine distribution versus school opening, obviously we know in terms of public policy, those things are connected. The more people that are vaccinated, in particular teachers, the more likely and the quicker we're going to be able to open up the schools. But opening schools has a real impact upon the economy, the ability for people to get back to work, to get back to normal. And so I think they're closely intertwined, and just a matter of emphasis. Just as we can't discount that Democrats don't worry about the economy and most Republicans don't worry about the coronavirus, but here it's really emphasis and where they see the country needs to go first.
And this is clearly President Biden's first huge legislative achievement, and he's going to take it on the road. His approval rating is around 50% in most of the polls, as is ours. We'll see what he does and whether he can ride this big legislative achievement to better numbers. Right now, he's doing better than Donald Trump did at this point in his administration, but not as good as George Bush or Barack Obama were. So again, the partisanship is there, but Joe Biden's going to take this one on the road and see how far he can go with his legislative achievements, recognizing he isn't getting a lot of Republican votes in Congress right now for anything he's pushing for.
One of the other questions that we've followed throughout this pandemic is whether people will get a vaccine or not. It was a hypothetical question when we asked it throughout most of 2020. It's not hypothetical anymore. There's 3 vaccines being distributed in the United States right now. And upwards of a quarter of American adults now, I believe it's a quarter as of today. I did
1 in 5.
20%.
Is it a quarter?
Hey, maybe a quarter. There is
I thought it was
someplace
1 in
between
5,
20 and 25% as of today. I mean, there's 2.5 million doses being given every day, so it's increasing by the day. But a lot of people have gotten it. Significant number of people. So we asked the question again this way. We asked it: will you take it if it becomes available to you? When it becomes available to you? No, you won't. Or have you already gotten it? So it's a little tricky because when we asked before, we can make at least some level of assumption that most of the people who've already received it probably used to be in the yes, I will column. Probably not all. Probably some people said no, and then friends got it, and they went, yeah, okay, and they went and got it. But if you look at that right now, 67%, 45% said yes, they're going to get it. 22% have already received it. 30% are saying no. That number is not terrifically different than what it's been over the course of us and other polls asking. There's always been this somewhat under 50% saying no. But is this, do you think, when you look at this number, and there is a partisan divide here, 41% of Republicans say they're not going to get it. Does this hold, do you think, or is this a reflection of the moment right now and another month from now when all these other people will have gotten it and more people will know people and more people will know that, there were no bad side effects and things start happening where the familiarity happens? Do you think that number will come down?
Yeah, I'll just quickly point out that I think when you talk about the people who are going to get it, or people will, I think the number had gone up from 62 to 67. I expect over time, when people think that, it seems to be a positive development and we're approaching herd immunity, I think we're going to see more people jumping on board the vaccine. If editorially, let me just say, I hope so.
So we are recording this episode of Poll Hub on March 11th. And 1 year ago on this very day, the World Health Organization designated the coronavirus as a pandemic. 2 days later, on the 13th, Trump declared a national emergency, and many Americans then felt a huge change in what we considered normal, not even knowing exactly what we had ahead of us. We are joined in this segment by Lulu Garcia Navarro. She is host of Weekend Edition Sunday and one of the hosts of NPR's morning news podcast, Up First. Thanks so much for Lulu for joining us today.
It's my pleasure.
So you did something very interesting. You asked your Twitter followers to share their recollections of the moment when they knew that things were going to be different. and you asked them to hashtag the moment. Why did you want to ask your Twitter followers about the moment?
It sprung out of my own recollections. At the end of February last year was the last time I got on a plane, and it was to my niece's wedding in Panama. And when I arrived at the airport in Panama City, there were doctors wearing masks. All the airport officials were wearing masks. And looking back now, it was the moment when I realized, oh, something very, very serious is going on here that we are simply not grappling with in the way that we should in the United States. I had been covering the coronavirus for, at that point, months, since December, when the first cases were being reported, and the Wuhan lockdown, then of course everything that we heard about on the cruise ships, then as it crept into Europe, and then the first cases, of course, happening in the United States. But it wasn't until that moment that I thought, oh, we are in for some big trouble. And then coming back to the United States a few days later and seeing that there was no preparation, that there was nothing at the airport security asking me about exposure. No one was wearing a mask. And so it occurred to me then, other people must have had their moment. We have been experiencing this pandemic collectively. We've all been going through this, right? But we've been experiencing it in dramatically different ways. And so I asked my Twitter followers, we created a segment off the back of it on our show, and the answers were astonishing.
Tell us a little bit about them. What responses really struck a chord with you?
So many of them. I think what was so beautiful about this moment collectively, trying to remember that time, was that we have been so divided. We have been atomized during this pandemic. I mean, I'm talking to you sitting in my guest bedroom. I'm looking at you in all of your different places. We are communicating virtually. We have not been together, and yet we have all been experiencing something collectively. And so what was so powerful, I think, about this and got so much response was that everyone just had their idea about when this happened. And things that came up again and again, Tom Hanks, when he announced that he had the coronavirus, that was a big moment for people. It was sort of a collective feeling that someone who was so beloved, who was an actor that everyone knew, had gotten this thing. That must mean that if someone so famous and so well protected has gotten sick, perhaps we could get sick too. And I think that was something that came through. Clearly the NBA, when they just canceled in the middle of a game, that was a huge moment for people. But it also happened in smaller, tiny moments, little things that all of a sudden seemed different and disconcerting. Going to the grocery store, not being able to find certain products. All of a sudden there weren't any cleaning products. All of a sudden you couldn't find pasta. People panic buying, or all of a sudden a phone call from a loved one saying, actually, I'm not going to get on that flight. Actually, we're not going to have that dinner party. The moments happened in all sorts of different ways.
Yeah, and I think we were all dealing with, a sense of uncertainty and then growing anxiety. But first, I think it was an uncertainty. And I'm looking back and thinking how much we've all become kind of like public health experts. We've learned a whole lot. We were in New Hampshire right during the New Hampshire primary with about 20 students, and we actually went to a event, a rally by President Trump on the eve of the New Hampshire primary, and he was calling it a Democratic hoax at that point. So in a sense, we were already then, and we'd actually had already done a poll with NPR and the PBS NewsHour, which most people hadn't heard of it and couldn't have cared less at that point. But then and I guess my moment was when I didn't know what it meant at the time, but when there was the word community spread, and the public health people looked very unhappy about that. And that meant I since understand that it was no longer traceable, but then we got into a different level. And that was sort of, kind of like a moment for me on that. I don't know if anybody else had something.
Well, you referenced that poll that we did, believe it or not, in January with some of your colleagues, Lulu, at NPR. And I believe 1 or 2% of people at that time said that they had changed their plans, their travel plans, because of the virus. And I think just a handful of people had actually heard of it. Certainly, no one was worried or experiencing anything at that point. But certainly, all our recollections is how, I guess, slow to the realization that we were here.
Not only here in the United States, there were reasons for that. The WHO was slow in calling it a pandemic. We had a president who, as you mentioned, was downplaying the danger. We now know that we had a CDC and other, public health organs that were in disarray for various reasons, were flat-footed for various reasons. And so there were a lot of things that came together that led to the catastrophe that unfolded in the United States. And I think that's another reason why this sort of resonated for people. We've been through so much. And if you think about the innocence almost of that moment, this idea of how little we knew about how our lives were going to change. Was this going to be something that was going to last a week? Was it going to last a month? When people started talking about months, and then maybe I remember Dr. Fauci saying it could be a year. I mean, it was deeply shocking. And so, we talk about these big national events of tragedy when we think about 9/11, other moments where something shocking has happened that has brought the country together. This was polarized from the very beginning. It divided us almost from its inception. And yet we have had this community experience, and there has been the loss of over 520,000 Americans. And it's a shocking number that I think we're still grappling with. But to go back in time and remember a year ago where we were, the plans that we had, the lives that we led that maybe won't be back in the same way, is, I think, a valuable exercise for us all.
You mentioned some of the personal things that people tweeted. Are there any of those that stood out? Because the small moments, I totally relate. I got off a plane coming back from Colombia, and at the same time you were coming back from Panama, and it was the same experience. Like, whoa, we're not treating this seriously. But the personal moments, those little times when something happened and flipped everything, are there any of those that really stand out from your Twitter followers?
I should have collected a few to read them out. There were, and I will tell you, thousands upon thousands upon thousands. I lost track after a while of everyone's, but I did read all of them because I felt that they were so moving. I'll tell you the ones that really struck me the hardest were the ones from frontline workers, healthcare workers, people who it wasn't so abstract for, people who got sick. All of a sudden, I had chills. I got a cold. I didn't know what it was. It laid me flat. People who ended up in the hospital. One of our own people from NPR, who's the head of our digital operation, a guy called Justin Bank, he contributed to it. He ended up on a ventilator. He was one of the first people to get it in New York City, and ended up for months, in the hospital, and was in a ventilator. That life-changing. The very idea that he's still alive is, he gives thanks to, every day. And so for me, those are the stories that are so hard, because the loss, again, is incalculable. The holes in our lives, the people who lost parents, siblings, that's something that, is going to stay with us for a long time.
The great contribution in what you're talking about is that we really lost that innocence, and we really just got to a point where this has become so enormous. We're living through history, and to have people go back and cite what they felt at that moment is the first chapter of that history.
Mm-hmm. A history that we're still living. Exactly. A history that we're still sort of, that is still unfolding, which is why on our show, we're actually doing a weekly thing where we're asking people in different ways, how has this pandemic changed you? Because I'll be honest, I think it will have changed us in ways that we're not yet fully aware of. For example, I feel incredible anxiety about, traveling again. I look at planes now, and even with a vaccine, I think we used to travel on planes. Everyone was together, and I would always get sick at some point, and I look at that now and I think that's crazy. That's a crazy way to have done things. You think about work, everyone in an office, open plan offices, I now know statistics, which I never knew before, which, there are some studies that show that if you're in an open plan office, people that work there are 60% more likely to have to take sick leave. I mean, we've now, as you mentioned, become epidemiologists in a way that we never were before.
And the numbers we haven't seen with regard to the flu last year and this year.
Exactly.
It's a great project that you've done. It'll be interesting to ask your followers if they remember the moment they knew it was over. I'm not sure that'll be such a hard, fine point as the moment we knew it began. And before we let you go, I'm a big fan. I listen to you every weekend. I play the puzzler every week, and I'm never going to win. So I'm never going to.
Everyone always says that until they get the call.
Right. Well, I may. So if I do, I'll see you next weekend. If I never get to ask Will Shortz the question, and I won't, does he dream polls? That's what I want to ask him. So there you go.
I will put it to him when I speak to him.
All right. Lulu Garcia, thank you so much for joining us from NPR's Weekend Edition Sunday, and also from the Morning News podcast that we listen to here on my smart speaker every morning as I'm making coffee. Thanks for joining us. Great project, and we're thrilled to have you here to discuss it. Thanks.
You're welcome. My pleasure.
And that's going to do it for this edition of Poll Hub. Poll Hub is a production of the Marist Poll at Marist College in beautiful Poughkeepsie, New York. I'm Mary Griffith and Poll Hub's executive producer. Thanks so much for joining us today. Rounding out our production team are Casey Schaff, our production supervisor, Amelia Morell, our production assistant, and Marcello Bettman, our trusted editor. Of course, thanks to the Roper Center Archive at Cornell University. They provide us with the ability to look back at survey questions and results over the decades. And if you have questions or comments, reach out to us on social media. We're at Marist Poll on Twitter and Marist Poll on Facebook and Instagram. Finally, if you like what you hear on Poll Hub, please consider leaving us a review on your podcasting app of choice. Positive reviews help others find us. And while you're at it, why not go ahead and subscribe? Again, thanks for being here. We'll catch you next week.